Hi, this is Dr. Kim, your host and dual board certified psychiatrist for It's Like This podcast. I just want this to be your safe space and a brave space to explore your mental and spiritual health to make sense of it all. In this podcast, we're going to find out together who you really are, what you're really capable of, and how you're going to get there. I am so excited that you're here, and let's enter this brave space together. In this episode, we're going to be learning about these sneaky mind tricks called cognitive distortions that keeps you anxious and depressed. We're going to be separating this topic into 2 episodes. So in this episode, we're going to be defining cognitive distortions and discuss why we have them and explore the first 4 out of 8 cognitive distortions. In the next episode, we'll finish with the next 4 out of 8, and we're going to talk about how we're going to break the chains and trick those mind tricks to get out of this funky mental health cycle. Very exciting, right? And if this is your second or third time tuning into this podcast, hey, we're basically friends. So why don't you make it official and subscribe to this episode so we keep in touch and that you don't miss our next meeting in this brave space. It will mean so much to me, and I hope it is for you. Anyways, let's get back to the episode. So cognitive distortion is a type of automatic thoughts. An automatic thought is a knee-jerk reactive thoughts that comes to you when you're triggered by a situation or perception. Now, if you go to the episode number 2, we talked in depth about cognitive triad. And cognitive triad is a triangle, like relational triangle relationship of thoughts and emotions and behavior. Automatic thoughts is the component of the thoughts. But under automatic thoughts, there's something called cognitive distortions. And cognitive meaning is related to thoughts. Distortion meaning that is a twisted version of the truth or reality. So essentially, you can understand it as the thoughts that distorts the reality. So if you go back to the cognitive triad, thoughts affects emotions, right? So if your thoughts are creating a distorted view of reality and your emotions are based on those thoughts, and 100% of the time, cognitive distortions are more negative than it really is, then you have negative emotions and it leads to negative and unhelpful behavior and it continues the cycle. And that's how cognitive distortions work. So one of my friends told me that there's an Indian proverb that says, the person who has jaundice, everything is yellow to him. And this is a perfect proverb to discuss cognitive distortion. Because how I view cognitive distortion is like a colored lens, like glasses that has colored lens that distorts the true colors of the world around you. So imagine if you have these lenses that has, red color lenses, you're going to see everything with a tint of red. And if you're wearing multiple glasses, on top of each other, the color that you see are going to get redder and redder and redder. Now remember, Dr. Aaron Beck, he's a psychiatrist that I mentioned in previous episodes. And he described cognitive distortion in a depressed patient like this. So, quote, he, the depressed patient, tends to perceive his present, future, and the outside world in a negative way and consequently shows a biased interpretation of his experiences, negative expectancies as to the probable success of anything he undertakes, and a massive amount of self-criticism. So Dr. Beck is seeing here that cognitive distortion affects not only the present, but even the past and the future. Not only how you think of yourself, but also outside world. That sets you up for your behaviors with a biased interpretation, right? So you have a blind side and you expect negative things and you expect no success. You only expect failures and you are just so down on yourself and it's just negative upon negative upon negative and you'll never climb out. And I wonder if some of you guys are listening to this episode that feels like that. Is no matter how hard I try, I just stay negative. I just can't get out of this funk. And I'm hoping that we can address some of those issues today. So why do we have cognitive distortions in the first place? So Dr. Paul Gilbert is a British psychologist, and in his article in 1998, article called The Evolved Basis and Adaptive Functions of Cognitive Distortions, he says it is suggested that cognitive distortions are natural consequences of using fast-track defense algorithms that are sensitive to threat in various contexts. Especially those of threat, humans evolve to think adaptively rather than logically. So let me just kind of break this down what he's talking about. Despite the fact that cognitive distortions are not logical or true or real, we go to cognitive distortions because it served the purpose for us to survive, especially in the environment that we were in. So, in other words, some of these cognitive distortions and twisted thinking we saw in our upbringing, like maybe in our parents or siblings, we heard it from how they applied it and it worked for them, or also what was said to us about who we are. And also as we live our life, we experienced certain events like trauma or disappointments, and it became an acquired skill. So cognitive distortion became an acquired skill for us to expect certain things in life. So for example, if your parents told you, you're just good for nothing, you're not good at anything, and you heard that enough times, you start to really buy into that label and say, wow, I'm really not good at everything or anything. And imagine that kid growing up and they, failed on a test. It reaffirms how he's not good at anything and everything, and he's a failure. And then he gets a divorce. It reinforces his understanding, I'm really not good at anything, and I'm a failure. So life events can reaffirm cognitive distortions in our life, but I think it always starts with what we were exposed to, when we were younger. And why do we hold on to these cognitive distortions despite how negative it is and maybe how untrue it is? And I think is to avoid pain of disappointment. So sometimes we can think, I'd rather just live with I'm not good at anything than to hope that I'm good at something and then get disappointed. Or you avoid pain of confrontation. So I'd rather just live with I'm not good at anything, just like my parents said, so that I don't have to challenge them and prove them wrong or confront them. Or avoid the pain of unknowns. I'd rather just live with the fact that I'm not good at anything. So I leave my potentials where it is, and I just know what to expect of myself and not come out of our comfort zone. So essentially, cognitive distortion might have started to protect us, to preserve us, and to survive. But you will soon see that as we're debunking each cognitive distortion, that cognitive distortions prevents us from hoping and prevents us from exploring and prevents us from thriving. So now we're going to dig into each of the cognitive distortions. I picked 8. For a fuller list, you can go to the link in the description box and to see if any of them applies to you. So you'll notice that a lot of these cognitive distortions, there's a lot of overlap. And I don't want you to get so confused on, which one is this and which one is that. One sentence, one thought could have like 3 or 4 cognitive distortion in one thought. Okay. But the whole point is that they work together to paint the picture. So imagine that if you have glasses with red color lens and you're seeing through 4 of them, right? You have 4 of them on your eyes. The colors gets redder and redder and redder. And each cognitive distortion can reinforce each other just to make that color just that much more brighter. So just be aware that there's a lot of overlap. Don't get confused with which one is this thought and which one is that thought. The whole point is that we have to recognize each of them and to try to challenge that. Okay. So the first cognitive distortion that I want to talk about is all or nothing thinking. Either you are good at everything, and if you're not good at everything, then you're a complete failure. So things like grade other than A is a failure. If your spouse or partner is not happy with you all the time, then you have a crappy relationship or you're a crappy person. If 1 out of 3 kids are struggling in school, then you're a horrible mother. If your work is kind of stressful, even though other areas in your life is going okay, then your whole life sucks, right? This all or nothing thinking. And sometimes all or nothing thinking drove us to work really hard, to be good at everything, to be that awesome person who's good at everything and every aspect of life. But what all or nothing thinking actually leads to, what it leads to is a dichotomous view, so all or nothing, black or white thinking, view of life versus the progress-oriented perspective. So instead of thinking A or nothing, like A or fail, you can accept the B's in life and C's in life. And even though your partner and you had a fight, right? It doesn't mean that you have a crappy marriage or crappy relationship. It's just a hiccup. All or nothing cognitive distortion always leads you 99.9% of the time of feeling like you're a failure. So this is why it doesn't amount to anything positive or realistic. The second cognitive distortion is mental filtering. So mental filtering is kind of focusing on one negative attribute and misses the bigger picture. So it kind of sounds like all or nothing, but all or nothing is kind of like black and white. Mental filtering is only looking at one color of the rainbow, okay? So focusing on thighs or C-section scars versus your maturing body and strong body that produce human beings. Focusing on that one question that you missed other than the whole grade, like 93 or 95 on a test. Focusing on one flaw of your spouse or your friend other than them as a whole person. Or a few negative comments on a feedback versus standing ovations or overall response from your work. Mental filtering, as you can kind of notice the pattern, it always focuses on the negatives. And it always leaves us never satisfied with what's going on and always seeing the world half empty. And imagine if you're only looking at your life and yourself, never satisfied with yourself and always half empty. That's just going to trigger more and more negative cycles of depressed and anxious feelings. Number 3 is overgeneralization. So this is when one bad experience leading to overgeneralization of a whole institution or culture or industry. So in the last episode, I talked about your experience with a psychiatrist, and maybe one bad experience with a psychiatrist can paint the whole picture of all psychiatrists are bad. So this is an example of overgeneralization. Or if you think you got dumped or cheated on once and you think I'm unlovable and everybody's going to cheat on me and I can't sustain relationships. So you can see that overgeneralizing one bad experience into the future array of experiences will always leave you feeling hopeless and also feeling very isolated, and that there's nothing that can redeem one bad experience. And the fourth one is jumping to conclusions. And Dr. David Burns, who's also very well knowledge in cognitive distortion, he defined jumping to conclusions as arbitrary jumping to a negative conclusion that is not justified by the facts. So 2 examples of jumping to conclusions is mind reading, and mind reading that people are thinking negatively about us, or fortune telling, predicting that bad things are going to happen to us. So jumping to conclusions can sound like overgeneralizations, but it's really jumping to conclusions of things that we don't know, such as intentions of other people and also future. So for example, in episode 1 and 2, we talked about the situation where your partner is not answering your text right away. And, the example that I gave was when they don't answer the text, you get upset that they're cheating on you, or are they dead, or are they safe? This is jumping to conclusions because you're concluding that they might be dead or they're cheating on you based on one experience that doesn't have the facts at all. So why would we jump to conclusions all the time? Because we're so insecure and anxious. Just having a conclusion or a reasoning of current situation gives us that sense of brief peace and awareness, and that's what's reinforcing these behaviors to jump to conclusions. But at the end of the day, leading to a conclusion that is not even true leads us to confusion and misunderstanding and limited scope of the situation. So just like if your partner doesn't answer the text and you jump to conclusions he's cheating on you, then it leads to consequential emotions and behaviors that really leads to a very misunderstood, confused situation for both of you. So that was the first 4 of the 8 cognitive distortion we're going to discuss in It's Like This podcast. I know that you want more and it is coming, and please come back for the next episode because we'll be talking about the next 4 of the 8, and then we're going to actually talk about what to do with them and how to get out of that tricky mind tricks that keeps us in the cycle of depression and anxiety. So, in summary, it's like this. Cognitive distortions are negative automatic thoughts that paints the color of our world. And it usually serves the purpose to preserve us and help us survive, especially in our upbringing. But it's a very powerful tool to keep us in the trap of guilt, bitterness, anger, and frustration, and depression, and anxiety. So my question for you is, which of these cognitive distortions ring the most true for you? And can you think of the situation that you really believed in cognitive distortions and actually led you to feeling certain way and acting certain way to fulfill your prophecy? And what would your life look like if you didn't believe in these cognitive distortions? Now, special announcement for this episode, I'm giving away 3 free 30-minute phone consultation to talk about your cognitive distortions and to give me feedback on the podcast. So right now, email me at restoropsychiatrymd@gmail.com, your name, your phone number, and the best time during the week. And for first 3 responders, I'll email you back to arrange the time. And we hear cognitive distortions everywhere. TV shows, conversations with family and friend. Imagine one person in your life that could benefit from listening to this episode and share with that person. Again, thank you so much for coming, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.